Today's 7th though.
7th. Oh shit. Okay, I'll change the. Okay, stream is live. Um, change the date to 7. So I started recording. My bad. Cool. So hey, welcome to the stream. We already started talking about something and then realized that haven't been streaming, and I have been recording instead. So let me quickly correct that mistake. And so now that we go live, we are talking about how do we want to approach the format and the medium and the brand, etc., and what are the things that um, drives the momentum, as well as what are the things that gives us more energy to continue forward doing the same thing, as in things that we enjoy. So with that said, with that brief context, I don't want to dig too deep into that because we were in the middle of a conversation. Um, I'll hand it over to Costa, who was speaking last at the last moment. Go ahead, Costa.
So the question was that how do we use the things that we have now to kind of build a, you know, not to call it a content pipeline as much as different areas of work that we want to get to. And the core of it is that there are a bunch of ideas floating around that is probably valuable to audiences beyond just the two of us. And what we would like to do is maybe take them into forms of blog posts as a podcast, eventually building onto some software, some usable things. But then instead of looking at these things as separate things that we have to produce, like not to be in a stage where hey, write 10 blog posts this month, two
Yeah,
podcasts this month, and I don't think either of us wants to get into this. So instead,
yeah.
one of the suggestion was that why don't we use these weekly discussions
Mm-hmm.
as stage zero,
Mm-hmm.
which is the most malleable part of the entire initiative. Over 3 to 4 such iterations in a month, we would have 3 to 4 such sessions, which
Yeah,
brings us to stage one, at which point distill or extract the information and categorize the information that has been created in these discussions, which then goes on to build blog posts, goes on to inform podcasts, but then and any other forms that come in. Um, but for any audience member, anybody listening in, the part that I was just saying last, and I guess Dev would have something different or addition to say here, is I see different levels of engagement as different levels of orbit. We were talking about the orbit model in Devrel and how that kind of changes the concept of looking at communities as a funnel that you get community members at the top of the funnel, they slowly filter down. Instead of that, look at communities as uh, objects orbiting around a central body. The central body of that solar system, so to say, would be the initiative or the project that you are building people around. So, in that sense, these stages are sort of the inner workings. So, these are very inner layers of the orbit. And then, like blog posts and all, you kind of get to how much more malleable that form is for us to maybe act on any feedback that comes in. So, that's probably a bit vague, but the idea is that we start with this and roll out anything new that uh, comes off of this data. How does that sound?
yeah. That sounds good. Right. To put my focus back into the part that you started with, not to call it a content pipeline, but the stages. How about I kind of lay down those like stages that are as they're coming into my head, and then figure that part out. So, say for example, the first initial part would be thinking out loud, which is what we are doing. So, first audience is us, like you and me, essentially, right? So basically, we are thinking ourselves out loud, and we are doing so through this streaming thingy. So some people might want to watch this live and participate in that process. They would pose the question live when it like in a, I'm not talking about right now, I'm talking about in its mature, more mature state. So they would want to come along for the journey essentially and be live participant of what is being discussed. That's stage one. Like we are the stage zero. That is the stage one. And the next ones would be the people who watch the VOD next day. Another layer would be people who hang out on our Discord server or something like that, something of that kind, like more real-time community support. I'm not saying Discord has to be it. It can be Slack, it can be Discord, it can be some other more decentralized or federated mechanism, metrics, or that's not the point. The point is like a real, as in synchronous, like real-time communication, more of a real-time communication, the platform where they can post questions, have discussion on that note. So basically becomes a community, like another layer of community. And the layer above that becomes the ones who read the blog posts or newsletters, whatever we want to call it, on a particular time basis. Or maybe there will be a level below that, people who see the curated posts on mediums, different mediums we share it on, Twitter or LinkedIn or other places where it gets shared. They read about it. Okay, they understand that there are these people doing something called entrepreneurship or something like that. And then the layer above that is people who subscribe to the channels or blog posts and watch the video when they're published on a monthly basis or something like that. So these can be the things. I may have missed some things. Okay, if you like give it some time and figure out, maybe we can document this whole thing together and pack together, then we have a more complete picture of how to go on about it. And
I think that's already a reasonably good um, distribution. And in all of these cases, like you said, it's also the level of engagement, which is what I called as malleability of the project under the hood. That
mhm,
because at this stage, any question coming in, we can respond to that, which will influence the course of the discussion.
yeah,
Over time, anything that happens in the community can influence the course of discussion in the next
yeah, iterations.
iteration. Anything that comes up through the blog posts will probably improve that blog post and potentially improve something that we write next. So, like how malleable,
Yeah,
it's like your distance from the center. So that's what I'm saying. This is a good way of, you have basically adopted that orbit way
yeah.
of thinking into this
I
structure.
love that model though.
Yeah.
I love that model. Yeah. Cool. So that kind of like, so basically we are aligned there. Would you say, like,
Yep.
or do we have any kind of decoherence there? Because I would love to, like, those are the points more important to me than, like, setting up the base correct is more important to me than the particular topic of this month or topic of this day, essentially. That's what I'm saying. Because unless we figure out a way to sustainably do this for over a long course of time, right? Doing a magic trick for a day is not what is gonna get us farther. Anyways, so that's where I was getting at. Cool. So with that said, we were talking about the future of software, and you were talking about scoping this out so that it's valuable for the people we are talking about. So with that, with this new light, I can say that let's not think about it in terms of what would be the scope that would be valuable. Let's talk about the whole thing, and then in retrospect we can choose that, hey, this is the part that, so do you think in your organization, mm, uh, the practices that you're following is effective by doing X, Y, and Z? What if I can show you that's not the case and you could do this instead? What if, like, which kind of teams should use flow based programming? Or rather, think about, are you a hardware organization and you're following the software practices of build fast, break fast kind of approach? Do you know that in hardware that doesn't work so well as it does for software, and they're not the same thing? In hardware, you should plan more better. In those kind of ways, like the concepts that we kind of take readily, but not necessarily are true for, like, it doesn't apply everywhere, or new light that can be shared on something. We can then pick those topics out and put them on a funnel for, like, can be presented better in a sense, not part of the only the real time discussion that we had. So with that said, there's doesn't need to be in my mind a certain kind of boundary that we need to follow or maintain here. This can be extreme raw stream of thoughts, as long as it's not something that is a boundary bordering on illegal, or something. I don't think there's any problem with that. Even that's a restriction I would eventually want to get lifted, but not possible now, so I'm sticking with it.
So I think I want to double down back on the build fast, break fast. Um, was that what you said? Yeah,
So that
like
is like fast iteration approach, right?
yeah, yeah, I
So
know.
it doesn't have to be perfect. Build something. Let's see
Yeah.
how well does it work. If something doesn't, put another layer of band-aid on top of it, and now it does, and now it's better. Uh, yeah, we can sell it.
So I wanted to start there because I feel like it's something that tugs very close to my heart. As in the issue that uh, I lost your video, but I think
No,
it should be
it's
fine.
fine.
Okay,
I am just,
yeah,
yeah.
switching.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. So the build fast, break fast, or like ship quick, and every other such
Fuck it, ship
acronyms
it.
and phrases that
Fuck it,
software
ship it.
development has
Yeah.
gathered. Yeah, and there is one fundamental issue with those approaches. And this is way more overlooked than mm, I would like to have. So that's, I guess, just one area that I wanted to begin with, and just to pick on why build the base, like spend time building the base is important, even though it looks like, hey, you are building very slow, you're not shipping at all. The difference between the two is if you chart build fast and break fast sort of iteration, you get from 0 to 10 very fast. You can do that, right? But in the process, what slows down as your breakages happen, because you're breaking, you're like what build fast break fast kind of translates to is where you don't worry about backwards compatibility of a project, because you're like, I am shipping it, I can ship all client instances, everybody will be on the same version, and things would go perfectly, like as if you've solved the distribution problem. So this is one facet of it. But the other facet of it is, as your patches come in, as more and more patches come in, your builds become slower and slower and slower. So you are breaking fast, but you're not building fast enough. And over time, the rate of your iteration slows down. And which means any new feature, at some point, you make statements like this that, hey, this system was not designed to accommodate those issues in the first place. So you have hit a threshold condition, but most of the time, if you really dissect that issue, what you will find is it's not that this system was not built. It's that the system has had so many patchworks, so many band-aids. It is standing on such a thin edge that any one more, like when the Jenga is like that full last brick will collapse it, it kind of gets to that stage. So build fast and break fast essentially slows down your iterative pace over time. So how do you then go back to building a foundation? What should that foundation do for you? If you're starting off a new project, if you're starting as in a new software project, you're starting off on a new learning, whatever. But let's stick to the software project area right now. If you focus on building out the systems first that help you iterate fast in the future, there is a difference between the two. You build fast and break fast, even though you're saying that we want to iterate fast and ship fast, you're often not taking care of other things that break, because you say that this is collateral cost acceptable to breaking. And in the other format, you are saying that, okay, I know systems will break, things do, software breaks, there are errors, but what I want is to have the ability to iterate very fast, ship out and update very fast, no matter how pervasive the issue may be. Or if I'm building something new, how can I ship on that? Which means, as a software team, especially let's say if you're building a new SaaS product, build out your platform team first. Make your any core runtime, any core technical decisions, lock them in. Make sure that you have evaluated things that you want to work with. So, for example, any standard SaaS, you don't want to bicker about what database to use. You definitely don't want to bicker about how should the schema be structured. If you're building a new service, you don't want to bicker about what should be the API standard, or that, hey, I want APIs to be built this way, which means there is certain standardization, which is what forms the base. But that is the thing that you need to tend to first, that your first shipment is to the your consumer is the internal team, which they can use to then iterate fast on top of it. So what that does is pretty much the blue line on this chart is it takes you off to a slow start, but then you get to this point of incremental returns where cumulative returns start pushing you broader. And with such a system, the K line can pretty much be open, scalable, community driven processes making giant improvements right after that threshold kicks off, because you're not stuck in the same loop, you're not breaking as much anymore.
Yeah,
And
going gets easier as you get going, essentially.
yeah,
So the reason it's are labeled R and K, and I'll come back to that. There is a very good reason. With all that you like explained about how putting more time in figuring stuff out works well, and why you think so, and why I think so, but many people don't. It boils down to a very different theory that they don't seem coherent, but they're absolutely exactly that way, which is why in hardware industry, if you go for that R selection strategy, you would fail miserably. You have to do K. And in software industry, the way the like gratification is modeled, if you are first to market, albeit with stupider products, and you got some people subscribe to that idea or model, now when your better version comes out, they already are subscribed to it, so you have more, as in, thing to play with, and you only can get more people out of that because your product can only get better, in a sense. And for anybody new coming in, if they go with the K model, by the time they get to the crossover point, chances are that that trend has already surpassed. That entire market has been utilized. Now that is true, and that was true, however, in a time where R and K followed a very different timeline, and the K selection actually needed a long time to actually be competitive. Now, with the new kind of tools, you can make K itself faster. You can plan faster, plan better, and actually cross the limits set points very aggressively than before. Whereas R will always get stuck at some point, and get like the going will get tough for it as it continues going forward, because it didn't start with enough groundwork to sustain that. Like, it becomes a Jenga block, right? So now those two curves follow two different style of evolution. One is a tortoise laying 500 eggs and basically leaving it be, going over. Think of those 500 eggs as 500 different ideas built for as breakfast. Half of them would not even make it to the sea for the first time ever. Some of them would, one of them might, but laying more number of eggs gives the opportunity for maximum variance or variabilities to be explored, which one gets selected. So if you're trying to make a selection, like which kind of selection would work better, that works very well in evolution. Lay more eggs, don't worry much about it, move on to your life. Next year, come back and lay 500 more eggs. That's it. Life is easy. You don't have to do much. Whereas if you go up the food chain, or like the, how do you say, like the success chain of the evolutionary species, what humans do, like we spend our first 18 years being kid. Like, not only that, we have we like things can go wrong. There are other entities will make sure things don't go wrong. They will give you that lower hanging part, like where you haven't built up yet. They'll give you that. They'll make you get you to that catch up point where you can cross over. Now you are adult. Now go break boundaries. Up to you, right? So that happens only in species who have found out their niche, or the selection has already been selected. Say, for example, sharks don't evolve as much as other species. They have been formed before dinosaurs. They're still there. right? The reason being, they have found their niche. Even if you go for a homogenic species like snakes, for example, two different species of snakes can behave two completely differently. A king cobra actually is a oviparous, not viviparous. So it gives birth to baby snakes, which is awkward and weird. It takes care of those baby snakes. Like, is not expected out of snake. Like, they're lowest form of reptiles in a sense, right? Why is that the case? If you think about it, okay, what does it do in a food chain? It eats other snakes. It's basically breaking that boundary. That green set point is basically transcending over what it is said to be. It's like Ratatouille. You're said to be a mouse, but you have become a chef. It's almost like that way. If you need to break that kind of boundary, if you go have to like set any kind of sublime, like become something that other people perceive as sublime, then you have to go the case selection mechanism. You cannot have excellence going by the art selection. But the art selection is what gives you the tools to work with for the case selection. So the entire whole point that I was trying to build is that not one can be thrown out for the sake of the other. However, one needs to find the balance. Is neither of those things alone is sufficient. If you get too comfortable in your skin in the case selection model, one certain asteroid will come and wipe your entire, not only species but entire ecology out, because you are too comfortable being large and big and breathing too much oxygen and cannot burrow under the ground, right? So that's what ends up happening. So if you want to sustain and survive, you need both. However, you need to pick and choose the balance, how much of innovation of R you want and how much planning of K you want. Usually that balance, usually whenever people say something is good, we have a tendency to do only that, like overdo those things. কাঁচা লবণ খাবেন না, so completely like off the salt, like would never touch salt ever again, that kind of thing, right? We tend to overdo that. So those kind of practices is where the challenges lie. How do you think, first of all, do you see the point that I was trying to make? Did I explain it
Yeah.
enough, or did I like
Would you
not
mind
explain?
sharing the screen back?
As in,
No, no, just share it again.
oh, okay.
As you stop
I just
sharing.
I crossed it. As in, I
Achha,
didn't save it.
didn't save it. Okay, there
Yeah,
you go. So anyhow, um,
I was
the
showing
part
it
that
back
you,
as in I don't.
huh?
I was showing it back as in I stopped showing. That's what you mentioned.
I mean, if you can share it again.
Oh, sorry. No, I have to
Yeah,
draw
so you
it again.
close.
Yeah, I
That's fine.
closed it.
So the thing that I was trying to get to, and I think you did a very good segue to it, is that the time it takes, right? Because one of the things to look at, and again, whether the K or the R flow, it depends on what your destination is. Like if you are doing something that is really wrong running, because there are chances that the results of your computation or the information that you need won't be available for a few years. So there is a wait period, whatever. So that K curve can take the advantage of where in time a specific milestone or a specific inflection point, to be precise, exists. Now, if you want to actually maximize this area, I would have asked you to shade the RK intersection boundary,
Okay. Yes. Hmm.
because the best way to then combine both, because you need the short bursts of acceleration. Again, if you look at agile processes and Scrum, you always have this concept of spikes, right? Which are your exploratory area. The very interesting pattern that emerges when you chart it this way is you kind of get to a tangent, like a diagonal double helix that forms as a result of the constant intersections of the R and K lines, and
TikTok model.
which is your step function, right?
TikTok model. Yeah. It's called TikTok model, and they Intel used it for their processor generation. One shrinks the die size, one increases the number of process. So
Yeah.
they
And
go it that
the
way.
point I'm trying to say is that the double helical structure exists in nature in exactly
Yeah.
these kind of situations. That where there is a contention between the energy usage and time, or efficiency over time, or there is this constant correlation because there are two things that are tying orbiting around each other. So what this would look like, if I am to map this to physics, is this would look like a binary star system pacing through the galaxy or through an universe, the route that they will chart. The important thing is that your R and K have boundary, like they have attraction towards each other. If your R and K separate, if they
Mm-hmm.
diverge,
Mm-hmm.
then you at some point would choose, a certain way, and that's fine. Like divergence is also good in some areas. Like let's say you have hit that area where you know that you found your niche and you want to carry on the K trajectory. It's okay to then detach from the R trajectory. But what would soon happen is, after a while, the same patterns would emerge, because again, this is fundamentally a step function.
Yeah.
You have to flatline and then you have to climb again, which is why I was saying that the best thing to then do is look at how do you combine innovation. So that if you shade that area between R and K, the reason I was saying that what that is, it's your safety margin. That R cannot exceed a certain boundary before K catching up. So if you then just continue on that front, it also means that those are stable. Uh, when you wrote E here, what was your E?
Entropy, but energy
Okay,
fits just
cool.
fine.
Okay. Okay, I went to energy. I was like, something doesn't feel right. So you see what's
What you're
happening
saying
here.
that, yeah.
I am saying the classic dualist philosophy.
Hmm. I got it. Like I see it that way. By the way, so
But you
this is
see,
not the
what's going
first
to
time.
happen is,
Yeah.
so you kind of go on this double helical
Hmm.
uh, process, but the double helical grows over time. What to watch out for is, again, if E is entropy, this makes all the more sense. That this curve should kind of be a linear and mildly, if you chart the intersection points of R and K and plot that, it should be near linear.
Yeah. It would be
And
linear.
in
It
fact,
would be
the
linear.
best equilibrium, you are doing it perfect when it is a perfect 45-degree angle
Yeah.
on the E by T chart.
This one.
That a
This.
perfect charting the growth of entropy over time, and having some points where you are merging back.
Yeah.
So that's quite a lot of theory, but then how does this boil down to what we are talking of, building the base? That are these discussions are pretty much the R line.
Hmm.
That it's the upward curve of the R line, right? And at
Hmm.
some point, if we continue along the R line, we are going to not produce anything that is worthwhile, and we are going to flatten out. There won't be
Mm-hmm.
newer ideas.
Right.
The the K line here is something that is taking whatever is there, creating that baseline, meeting up to meet like a publishing point.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
when let's mark that as like E1 T1 sort
Right.
of. If let's say
Yes.
the first inflection point,
First, let me mark the
or
I
R1.
like.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, this inflection point. This point.
yeah.
Okay.
So this after this first inflection point, something interesting is happening. If you
Hmm.
notice, the R is sort of taking a period of recovery where it is catching up. But in that point, the K line actually has a lot to catch up on. So that publishing, the feedback, and everything comes in some sort of stabilized delivery. Meanwhile, this needs to build up. So one interesting, I mean, this is of course hand drawn, but when you plot it, what's going to happen is your R would never dip below its current Y levels.
Hmm. Hmm.
Your R would flatten and
Hmm.
then go up
Hmm.
again.
Yes.
So the P here is one of those key inflection release points. Whenever you are at this P, each time you can take a call on whether further, like which direction to go next, because from there you can choose key, I want to do another burst of development. But in any case, it ends up looking like a double helical pattern some
which
way or
is
the
why
other.
which is why I do not promote, like, personally, to go for either one of those approach. And if you notice, we haven't been doing either one of those approach um, by itself. What we did is that we kept the idea generation factory, this R, as it is, untouched. Go ahead, do your thing, right? At some point, you will hit a ceiling or something like that. No more ideas coming out. I don't know whether when that will happen, if that does. But we are not tying it with success of the whole thing to that only. We're saying no. Let's talk about how do we classify that, categorize that, how do we set up the platform in a way. That part of the discussion was the case selection, right? So we did both at the same time. And that is the ideal approach to go on about it, is because how at ease both those, like the two parts of the double helical structure is with itself. So the moment when we come to that inflection point where the distribution mechanism is having same amount of success as the idea generation one. So idea generation has stalled enough, and the distribution mechanism has risen enough to come to that point. That's when we have to now switch our mindset about, hey, do we need to cover more ground, more areas that we can cover? And this mechanism of distributing that works is just let more subscriber come in, like, or like whatever people were talking about or listening to, let them talk about it, listen to that, and think it will keep on going there. It will flatline much later, much after. By that time, let's think about whether there are more ideas to talk about, right? So that way it will keep on shifting perspective. We'll have to put a little more here, a little more effort there, a little more effort there, at the cost of putting a little less effort here or there. In that way, like, they will go back and forth. But those identifying those inflection points is where the actual. So if I had to talk about like how tech CEOs or CTOs, like basically CXOs, should think about these kind of things, it would be, so not only them, any for anybody for that matter, it makes the same sense. But how your priorities, the two aspects of it, where do they meet, and at which point you should decide that you need to shift gears in either one of those? Because this battle between, have you watched Wally, the movie? There is a space thing where Wally and Eva goes in a spiral. That's exactly what it ends up looking if it is not drawn poorly on MS Paint. So, uh, so that's what I was getting at. So that's what it will constantly change and shift, and that is the good way. No case selection is perfect case selection for forever. The world, the reality, the universe would put blockers in front of you that you would need to rethink about it. You need to shift the perspective and change up some of the parameters to make it fit better. And no art selection is going to be forever as well. Pretty much by definition, it will flatline out if you don't start to reorganize that. I have so many examples for this. I don't know.
Can you
Um,
name the green plane so
so
that I have
that
a
is
visual
how the
for it?
progress looks like from
Then I
zoomed
said, can you
out
just
version.
put a marker to it so that I can
It's
refer to
P.
it instead of
So
calling
it's
it the green?
P, the
Actually, I
progress.
thought P was the point. Okay,
Point.
fine.
Oh, okay. So that I should have called the point P as, like, okay, wait, inflection. So it can be I. I don't want to
No, no, that's
acknowledge the
fine. That's fine.
inflection
I said
points.
just name the axis. If that's P, then that's fine. Now, the important thing to remember is why in our discussions, at least some of these places where these things work out. Because if you map this to the functioning of a good product and development team,
Hmm.
in most software organizations, the R is your product management, who are going out exploring possibilities, coming back to you with arguments. The K catches up, right?
Hmm.
Then there is the R going down below the K is the period where product management is gathering feedback for something that has been shipped. Meanwhile, there is a constant thing that is going on, like an excess
Full
development
fledged development going on. Yeah.
going on, because by
Hmm.
then you're validating. At one point that goes, and then you again curve back out, right? So the green, what is important in this is, if you want to independently control the rate of R and K, you might fail. It might look like it is intuitive that, hey, I can of course turn, but no. The important thing is the green line, the P plane, that wherever you are going, the P plane should target there, which means if you are going somewhere, you don't have a lot of time, your P plane will be far more sloped upwards so that you reach at the end of the point. But what this uh, mainly looks like, yeah,
So it's basically matter antimatter in a
it
sense,
is,
like
it is,
how
it is.
much it goes above the progress line. It also also have to have that much below the progress line.
So
Anyways, yeah, go
one
on,
of
continue.
the things I want to, the reason I said this is important is, when I first said about the double helical structure, right? So if you just draw, chart the distance from the like the delta r with the delta from P at each point, and then you do delta k from P, you should never do R to K as a straight thing. You should always branch off from P. So your
Hmm.
P is kind of ideal where I want to go to. So that is, if you then look at two stars revolving around each other, running around the galaxy, if you again plot their movement, you will get the orbit of both the suns, right?
Yes.
And that is the important factor, that where is the thing going? Because the way you nudge this system to go in any other direction is by changing where that green would end up.
Right. So basically, the green is the barycenter of those two, like two body system is the barycenter where other two things are basically revolving around. So it's, in this setup, over time, it would be considered as axis essentially. Um, yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Anyways.
why this is more important is you need to look at this. It's of course over T, so it's a state machine slash a motion uh, snapshot, whatever you want to call it. The critical thing to know is this is a very simplified version. This is a simplified in the sense this is a reduced version. In real world you would have at least three or four such axes pulling along each other, but you would probably be able to call them as R1 R2 and K1 K2. You can broadly group them in these two opposing forces categories. The reason is it's like, imagine all of Jupiter's moons orbiting around Jupiter. What does that look like? That you have that many ropes, like things going on, right?
Right.
So one of the common things that comes up in most product, especially the sort of software product who are more tuned to community, that they want to take in community feedback, is there is a friction between internally on should I prioritize community feedback or should I prioritize what my CEO wants?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that presents a very weird but very difficult to solve friction as well. And one way to address that is again be true to your the P plane. If you have a clear enough idea of where that is, you can just map a community feedback on the distance, like chart the delta R from
Yeah.
P, see
Yeah.
if it is within acceptable range, in which case treat is just as the same as any internal team member has suggested it, right? That it is on that curve where I see delta R reducing over time till it intersects with K.
Mm-hmm.
So, mm, well, we speak maths, but that's uh,
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely
in
fine.
essence, it's very, it will take too many words to explain otherwise. But what I'm trying to say is just map the functions. So you don't want to start with R alone or K alone. Then the part that comes in is once you identify this, you realize the importance of iterations. Fast iterations on this plane would mean more frequent intersections between R and P. Sorry, R and K.
Right.
Slower iterations would mean longer durations, but slower iterations have a challenge key. You might have difficulty the longer R and K have diverged, the longer it might take to converge them back. So you want to place a limiter function on what is the maximum distance possible for R before the K function triggers an upward curve.
Right. Um, for the people listening to this and being a little bit, um, I don't know what is the right term, like
I would like you
out
to
of.
just break this down
So
to more
not break
familiar
this down. I'll
concepts.
give an example because sometimes I've seen what works out of the esoteric discussions is that an example immediately grabs the attention back. So I will give an example. Like chip vendors, right? That's probably like, it's not a rocket science in that sense. It's actually more complicated than rocket science. So it is super complicated stuff. Probably the one of the most complicated things we do as a species is producing chips. Now, there are always a lot more factors that gets into this and creates this to be not as simple as that. This graph, two different factors. But if you try hard enough, you can still always make a multi-body problem into a two-body problem. And this is a model that Intel follows, used to follow, and now still now follows, is when their odd generation of chipsets, like chips, like 15th generation, 13th generation, 11th generation, also, they follow a particular kind of R and different kind of K, or right, basically the phase shift essentially. What is R here would become K here in that it's kind of way. So what they do, they have boiled it down to like, hey, we need to do two things in order to give or provide people with more amount of computing power in same or similar kind of package. We need to do two things. We need to lower the size of the silicon, as in the transistors that we have, and pack more into the same time. So how about we put more innovation, and both those things, they are not two separate things that are happening separately. What is happening is that from the moment of their team is done with 11th generation, that team starts working towards the 13th generation. Their objective can just be, how do we pack more chips into that same layout, same size, whatever the LGA size is. And whatever, the moment 12th generation are done, they would move to 14th generation. How do I produce, like, as in create the transistors themselves are smaller, right? In that sense, they create double x, like 2x the phase than what, because if you see about this graph eventually comes down and meets it somewhere over here. Then when it starts back again, this point and this point are practically the same point. So basically it's 2x that phase, then perceived phase, that becomes its original pace. So every two generation, they're doing the exact same thing all over again, starting new, going to. But for the first part of it, one team is in experimentation mode, the other team is in production mode. The next phase, the other team is in the experimentation mode, and this team is in production. And that works so well for them. They're sticking by it. And even though AMD threatened them with a very different kind of innovation, where they're like, we don't actually want to even build the whole thing in one die. Screw that. It's much easier to build them in smaller pieces and put them back together. So I will want to do that with chiplet design, right? So at that point, what do? You can just split off, like, oh, hey, there's a TikTok model teams that we have. How about we keep the TikTok model teams as one, R or K, and the chiplet team as R and K, R or K, like depending on which phase they are in. So you can make anytime any multi-body problem into two-body problem. So one team is gonna look into how the chiplets can be made. The other team is gonna look like always how I can make the chiplets themselves more denser. So in that sense, what is in the ending up happening is that no matter how complicated the system is, this does not only apply to a very simple or theoretical only situations. You can make it apply anywhere, wherever you can perceive a duality. You can perceive a pull or push and pull, tug of war between two different forces. Do I do this or do I do that? This should actually help you out with that. I lost your video feed.
Oh, just give me a minute, carry on.
All right. Right. I don't know where else I was going with this. Should I be starting to think about a better analogy or example? I kind of think like the chiplet design or the chip vendor kind of example is not really.
I think we can just probably follow because we were talking future of software development. This is one place to come back to when we were saying that, like, the pace when we went into this discussion,
Is there any
and just
software
like
vendor that follows that?
This I don't know, but it's something that is visible in, like,
I'm
I'm not sure
closing
if
this, by
somebody
the way.
explicitly
I, I'm
follows. Yeah,
I'm not saying that I'm
yeah,
closing it. Okay.
yeah. So the only thing to remember is that while you said that you can break down a multi-body problem into a two-body problem, in most cases, but there will be edge cases where you are stuck with a three-body problem because you start dividing, like decomposing, and you end up with three fundamental elements because, like, the lowest number, you can't divide three um, and retain a whole number, right? So, what goes on in that kind of a situation is you are presented with a slightly more chaotic world. The two body world is far more deterministic. The three body world is extremely chaotic. And science fiction plug way three body problem and all. If you just that three body problem itself is one of the things to geek out on. It's such a beautiful mathematical problem and social problem, any way you want to put it, right? But what happens is, and I think this will come up more. This will become more and more relevant as complexities of software development increase because there are more things riding on it. And uh, I have experienced this in some form, like where I said it becomes a three-body problem because in a traditional software development organization, you cannot always compress things back down to two, especially when you are more community focused. And this is something I've seen happen with the more progressive software organizations. You know, because uh, in a traditional software org, you have your like product design, development, management, whatever, as one function. You have development as a function. Uh, so you sort of have two broader sections. But then the moment you bring in, so what these two teams do with user feedback is the user feedback is split into their separate buckets, right? That is how you are breaking down a complex system into a two body system. That when user feedback is coming in, you are saying, is this a product feedback? Is this a engineering feedback? And it kind of, you are channelizing. But what happens when you bring in a community as a first class citizen in this process? And say, for example, the way Mozilla builds software, the way more of the community focused, even for profit companies build software, those who actually take community input seriously.
Hmm.
And the reason you see the open source world, and especially partially commercial open source worlds, be such a tricky minefield to access, also to build and maintain, because at some point you take decisions which are harmful for the community. At some point, the community asks something which is detrimental to the earnings or the sustainability of the project. So then it is still not that difficult. It is just one other axis which might have chaotic influence on others. So at that point, you have two choices. Do you want to then merge the community? Like whenever you start with a three body problem, so I mean, it's essentially validating there that if it is not three stars that are orbiting each other, in which case, well, good luck. But if you have some control of the system, you'd want to merge one towards the other. For example, are your internal stakeholders
In
the
fact,
same
it's
as
not.
community
In
members?
fact, you just said that screw it if it's stars. Good luck with that. That's exactly what is going to happen. I was just going to come back to giving you the same solution. That's exactly how it's going to end up happening. What else do you think is going to end up happening?
Yeah, so eventually, I mean, our nearest star
This,
neighbors.
yeah, I'll like Centauri system, so Proxima
Yeah,
Centauri, so Alpha Centauri, and all those. That's a three-body problem. Yes, the small one
so
and the
the
two
three body
larger
problem
ones.
series is based on that star system.
Oh, I see. I see.
uh, so, but the very interesting thing that happens is eventually systems coalesce given long enough time. But what if you don't want to give that long enough time? The immediate answer to especially those building software where you want to involve the community is do not keep a distinction between your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Everybody is a stakeholder for the thing that is being built. You just have stewards that are probably on your payroll who are your internal like stakeholders, So then you have moved that, the graph of requirements. Instead of having a CEO to fight and a community to fight, you're like, community CEO is just a community representative, right? Or the community is just an extension of my internal team. Now, I want to really push that model. So far, I have not had much success in coalescing those because uh, individual egos kind of still, border. But what would it look like to build an org where what would it look like? We have seen these orgs built, but reducing the chaos in that system, coalescing them better such that the community is a homogeneous entity.
Right. So one challenge that I've seen, the part that bothered me the most, which is why I'm trying to put my best foot forward to not piss off people and try to reach people, is that most people in position or power, the way our selection worked out for them is that where they like very aggressively assertive, where they're very conscientious, and so those are the things that propel them forward and put in a position of power, are not have this put enough thought meditating about a certain topic, validating whether that's correct, true or false. No, not that, right? So what ends up happening is that the people who needs this kind of help the most are least likely to seek it, or least likely to even be open to it if you even if you hand it over to them. So the way I'm starting to think about is that not how do we distribute, but rather finding out who are those people, how do we get those people to a place where they would be open to taking these ideas in the first place. Do you think these discussions that we are having, many or most people who are running or having a team that they need to run better, they have all the intentions to make it run better, but do they have the intent, capacity, and the availability, or like being a position, like how do you commit a crime? Essentially you need to do three things: you need to be in the place, you need to have the intent, and you need to have the capability. So I'm saying that, can you find that trifecta of people in a mass scale? You don't. You find very rare few samples, and those samples are already kind of jaded out of the system. Take yourself for an example. The only reason you are so motivated to talk about these things is because how much it bothered you when you are or were in the system, right? How do we find those people? How do we find how those people, instead of being jaded at the system, how they can actually be part of the system and drive that change from the inside, instead of like kuch nahi hoga, I'm out of here. No, instead of that, right? I think that is probably the best bet that we have got, because you cannot make a horse out of an ass. At least I'm open to be proven wrong, but I have tried and I have failed miserably every time I try to go that route in certain days. But it is better. It is more effortful. If sorry, no, it is more, what do you call that thing? Fulfilling to find out the horses, even if lower in number, and then train them to become the horses that you want them to be. You will get a lot of kicks, that is fine, but eventually it will get to that position, and then you will count that as a success, and that's much better than spending enormous amount of time pretending this donkey is a horse and can replace a horse. It's not what where it goes. So that's how I think about this whole thing. Like, who should we talk to about this kind of stuff? um that may not be the right answer to the question that you have asked, but if you can touch on the way how would you want to go on about it, then I probably can add some more thoughts about it. This was my immediate, very like deep seated or rooted kind of fast answer, essentially, not the nuanced answer. I understand that.
The way I want to go about it is not by starting to look for people, but instead take these things as frameworks. If these can be packaged as frameworks, and when I say
Templates.
frameworks, anybody who's in a scenario, so let's say if this applies um, to a certain way of building, structuring an org, then what would those principles be? And I'm kind of drawing in from how the Orbit framework went from being just a brilliant, like very beautiful abstract idea to an implementable framework.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea, the first thing that you do in any such implementation is you map to existing concepts, which means if I were to take any organization, produce this chart based on their activities, what does my R and K planes look like? Do they even intersect? Do they even exist? Is one of the first things. So being able to, so I would actually look at this as a framework, publish this as a framework, and with like framework applied to specific scenarios, and just going detailed into some of those, maybe that if you are, and then speaking to personas, right, that how to apply this if you are a junior software developer, how to apply this if you are a senior developer, how to apply this if you are a new people manager, how to apply this if you are an architect, because at each position, at each levels of power, there are different areas that somebody can influence in. But the importance of such a framework comes when it gives a handbook for the entire power structure, so that whoever is bringing this in into an organization, let's say they find something which they feel, let's say me as a manager, as a new people manager, find something that I feel the org can benefit from. But what happens is when I bring something in, it's also on me to help others learn, others implement, and that becomes one of the burnout points for somebody like me who wants to do good, who wants to build something from the inside. But if I got something which not just told me what it looks like for me, what are the things that I need to do, as much as what does it look like throughout the entire power structure, sort of the framework that helps them see at their views, that immediately becomes a lot more useful. And then see different levels of adoption, and whatever levels of adoption an org goes through, sometimes the impact stays limited to one team in a larger org, like one team of 4 or 5 members or 10 members. Over time, over a few quarters or few iterations, what starts happening is other teams start seeing that this team is doing something different, where they have become more stable, they're shipping software better, they are more predictable. So what is it that they're doing? If the answer at that point is not specific people, but a certain way of work that they have been able to adapt, then immediately there is that viral proof based distribution that happens. So, what I'm then saying is the way I would like to bring this to the masses is by looking at the layers and seeing what would be that implementation, and maybe even looking at this from a few lenses. For example, let's say the future of software development is one, then building an organization that follows some of those principles being one. um, I kind of see this as a handbook with use cases. One specific example, let me see if I can find, I'll share with you what I mean. But this is the direction. Now, what I mean with this is then, with that theoretical framework in place, the people to talk to are those who have tried applying it,
Mm.
get that feedback, and sort of build from there as well. What I'm not sure about is if that is the work that we want to do en masse, or is this more of a blog post series?
I've been trying to match the suggestion up with my experience of exact same situation, which has happened. And my expectation was what you said. People see that, hey, some other team are having more success or equal success with different practices, or same more success with same practice. What is it that is different about them, and why is it that way? And let's learn from it. Let's implement that. The reality is much more grimmer than what would that idealistic viewpoint would suggest. First of all, nobody would go to like want to look into that mirror or acknowledge that somebody else is doing it. So I'll give you a more tangible, actual and real. So a team practicing agile. and another team is not. One team is completely into procuring high quality talents, letting them do whatever they want, and they have a good backlog management of like, hey, here are the things that are priority for our organization, for the bigger goal of our organization. We need to get all of these things done. You're not bound to do one thing or the other, but whatever you pick and choose, try to be successful at it, like implement that successfully. Don't leave it at half as way. You will have to produce enough uh, result out of it. That's, we know that you've spent your time with it. Even if you fail and you want to hand it over to somebody else, that's fine. Right? So that's one approach. And the other one is like the normal baseline run of the mill agile. It's not even that the what is the what does the book say, kind of, is the normal practice of agile. So that's what is happening. Which team do you think is over the course of time producing better result? And I'm not going to give you the answer here. I don't want to sound biased to anybody who is listening, and like I don't want people to tune out there because it doesn't match up with their expectation. The thing is, after over 2 years of that happening, one team is doing, like, sustaining very well at low overhead of operation and having generating very good results overall, but the other team or teams are not really ready to learn from that at all. They don't want to acknowledge that has anything to do with their lack of momentum, has anything to do with the practices they're following, or rather the time they're ending up spending doing things that may or may not contribute to the overall progress of the organization. They simply would not acknowledge that in the first place. Improvement comes after you acknowledge that, hey, something can be improved. So in that sense, if you take it from there, I would argue you would be, the first blocker that you would face is convincing them that they need to do something differently because they are not doing it well enough. Solutions are easier. Accepting you need a solution is the hardest part, in my whatever I've seen. And it's kind of heartbreaking. Like, those are the parts that actually I get mad. Like, I'm usually not, I take everything in jest most of the time, but those are the things, like real wastage of potential and people choosing to ignore facts just because their worldview does not align with that. Those are the things that grind my gear very hard, essentially. Now, I'll stop there. I know that I might rant a long while if I just if I'm allowed to get started with this. So I'm going to stop there, and yeah, that's it.
So I shared the two links there. Essentially, the exit to community, one of those things pretty close to my heart. But the way these people have applied this, it was one of the examples that I was trying to show, is one of the ways I would like to, work on it. Um, the core idea behind exit to community is how can we build organizations such that they serve the end community that you are using, and then for startup founders or for people building new organizations, instead of targeting IPO, which is like the two common forms of exit, that you are either acquired or you go IPO, uh, this is a third alternative
I
to
see.
that, which is saying you plan for an exit to community. And there are a bunch of tools, a bunch of things that you can use. They also have many such organizations, all of them of course smaller scale. And exit to community focused organizations tend to be niche focused, because if it's kind of like identifying a niche user base, building for them in the hope that eventually all of them will take ownership of um, this entire organization. So, which fits very well into how you and I think of initiatives. That for us, a maturity is when it has gotten community acceptance such that we can move on to the
Yep.
next. In fact, spin up multiple side by side.
Its existence does not rely on the parents taking care of it on a daily basis.
Exactly. Like the kids have grown up, sort
Yeah,
of. But the difference is this produces far more focused, far more impactful work,
of course.
because you are not trying to chase artificial money. You are always focused on sustainability,
Yeah.
and that is how things would go. So I gave that as an example. I think
No,
exit to
that's a
community
fantastic
is very
example.
close to
I loved
our.
it. I went to the links, and for the people watching the stream, they would have seen that because that's the one that will be shown there in my screen capture, right? So they would have seen it already. I went through the pages.
You did not share any
I
screen.
didn't share it. I was going through that. So
Right.
about browser window
Acha,
was
acha, sorry,
yeah,
in the
yeah.
cool, understood. So that is the idea behind. I mean, in fact, exit to community exhibits this tendency, that you are never moving too far from your green medium,
It
uh,
is
and
the
you are balancing innovation and sustainability,
right.
eventually to a delivery point.
No matter
But
how you explain it, the baseline of that is playing that infinite game versus finite game, where people who are
exactly,
exiting for with money, they're playing a finite game. They have to win somewhere. They have to put it on an objective scale of this much, that much, etc. But the moment you're exiting
yeah,
the community, you are ensuring survival of something that is bigger than the support that you can provide. Like, how long can you stay within the game, and how long can you, along with a mind share of a whole other multiple layers of people sticking to that, would provide it or give it. Runway would be completely different, like sustainability would be completely different, and like order of magnitude different, or bigger, essentially. So basically you are playing an infinite game, and like a couple of order of magnitude you are enabling yourself to do more stuff. That is, the moment somebody would understand that from that finite infinite game perspective, you don't have to sell more stuff to it. They immediately know how they want to play it out loud, but play it out. But for most people, that part is not that obvious. That choice is not that obvious. How do you convince somebody to understand or recognize the difference between that finite and infinite game? Why chasing after simply just for money is not too, like, in my mind, it's not too different than the paperclip maximizing, right? The theoretical, like the thought experiment of paperclip maximizer, a rogue AI that learned, okay, how to make more paper clips out of anything and everything, goes ahead and starts making paper clips out of anything and everything, depletes the resources, natural resources, just makes paper clips because that's what it's trained to do. That's what, where it finds its meaning or purpose in life, essentially, or whatever that might be. So we, by trying to maximize profit, we're being that profit maximizers in the exact same vein. So how do you convince somebody to think of it differently?
and the good thing is there. What the reason I pointed out is this entire, like the second link that I shared, the PDF. That's the gem. That's something to like print and keep with you. That talks of how different levels of organizations can deal with some case studies, with some ways of thinking, and of course, unblocking some of those ways of thinking, leaving you with some more things to do. So this is one. I was saying this format. Like I feel like the output of all of this discussion, if it is that a PDF, really that people like a book, so to say, that you can, or a booklet that you can share, publish. I think that itself has value to build. But I wanted to eventually arrive at exit to community. I'm glad I kind of came through this because again, talking of the future of software development, what we were trying to mention with the build fast, break fast thing, there are two considerations here, and I'll just touch on them quick and move on. The first is the current set of tooling that we have or that we're evolving to does enable you to build actually faster. So your R cycles can be smaller. Uh, Deployment capabilities have increased so much more over the last decade
Yep.
that the maintaining a state of the art deployed system is something that pretty much any small team can do today.
Yeah.
And it's not even as crude as Ansible in 2012, 13.
Yeah.
Even Ansible feels so much better
Better now. Yeah.
already. But uh, the point I'm trying to say is that they have become better because they have continued on that certain line of democratization of technology, or rather, that's a cliche, but maybe it will give me catchphrase or like clickbaits. But the point is, it's more breaking down technology to make it more available to more and more people. And the current LLM driven AI boom that we are seeing actually introduces a very key element into that equation, that now you do not just build fast. When you break fast, it's constantly saying break fast and it's messing with my head. Uh, but when you actually break too often, let's say, your breakages can be significantly more harmful.
Yes, correct.
And you cannot continue using these same tools, experimenting and testing in the same way.
Right.
You need a far more contained, like it's like if CERN was like, hey, we need to collide two particles, I just give me any random desert on Earth, right? Because we used to collide things, see if like I used to test cars, I used to mash cars against like fast moving cars and test how they broke. You can't do the same with two photons, you can't do the same with two atoms colliding. So what we need though is
Scale
make
and
sure
impact.
that the breakage is like make that breaking a part of your testable framework, which means you don't optimize build often, break often, or build often, you know, and disrupt often.
Fast
What you would
iteration,
want to
essentially.
is
Yeah.
fast iterations. And if you follow that line, so you would want to minimize the gap between the two. You would want the R and K lines again to coalesce as often as possible. But know that what's going to happen with our current set of technology is the double helix, if especially if you have short iterations, are going to look like bubbles strained after one another, a chain of bubbles. It's not, you're not going to have the gentle curve anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and the only reason is you're probably looking at time in a different way. If you expand the time axis, you zoom in, you will again start seeing that curve, but now it is just slightly steeper. So, what it means is short iterations, quick tests, immediate feedback is essential with the sort of systems that we are working, because I mean, think of it as you are a crew member of the USS Discovery, which has just gained sentience. It has just come across emotion, so this started Discovery season 4. Uh, and then it decides to plunge towards the sun. You don't have a lot of time, right? Now, if your systems were more like, hey, take the system down one by one, examine, it's not going to work. Which means your fail safes need to take into account that the R thing can actually suddenly break out. You won't be able to bring it back in. That breaking out might be your AI has gained sentience. If you define sentience as just having emotions, um, however we define, let's just say it's beyond your control. And beyond your control, if you look at the two stars orbiting each other, right, in this case one of them decides to shoot off in another direction, you would then have two choices: let that go, like that ship has sailed, or try to converge enough, pull, exert enough influence to then bring that back to a meeting line. And I think Dave is like itching to say something, but this is the point I was trying to get to. That why this framework actually applies is it really shows the implications of software development using where we are now.
Yeah, so that was very interesting actually. So I think like, okay, how about we keep at particular times, maybe next week, discuss about the perception of time versus control. How much time you need for which kind of controls, right? On the surface, it might seem like what's there to discuss about it, but trust me, there's a lot to dig in over there, and actually, it can be seen in a multitude of ways. Only part that I'm going to mention right now is that the Stoic versus the will to power philosophies. You said that there are only two options. One is, guess I will die, and then like we're fucked. Or otherwise, like, I know I might die, and if I sit down I'll still die. Then why not die swinging the sword and try to like align the world to my needs, essentially. So those both those approaches, either of those approaches can work, but depending on like the best option that you got is that never be rushed for time. Best controls that you have got is never the ones that do not rush you towards a particular set of time or time wise delivery, temporal deliveries essentially. So that's going to be part of the next that episode when you talk about control versus time. At any point, if you feel like you're rushed for time, it only means you haven't established your controls well enough for that. And your concerns are correct on at least the AI front. Is that was true for nuclear when we found nuclear whip as in power as well in a nuclear energy. We could harness nuclear energy. How are you gonna harness it? Controlled burn versus explosion. That in itself was to the point in retrospect looks like a much smaller problem. Like you need a couple of thousand to actually wipe out humanity. So it's not as readily of a problem. So as we go forward as a species, we are going to cause bigger and bigger of those potential harms that we can cause to ourselves by not being mindful about that R versus K, like how much planning versus how much exploration can we do. Um, and there's that. I don't think there's an answer to this. It's just that the moment any one of us lose sight over one for the other, that's the moment something bad would happen, essentially. It's not a question of if, but when it becomes. The only thing that we need to ensure is that the control and the exploration both basically go hand in hand, going back to the topic of that double helix model. Yeah. So I'll stop there. And I think it's better to close the discussion as well, essentially within a limited amount of time, because we need to get into the practice habit of that practice.
Yep. So I think this was but then maybe we want to go a bit more into specifics in some of those areas,
Examples and stuff.
right? So I think if I can end the stream. So in this case, we can just wrap up.
Cool.
The stream.
Let's wrap it up here. This was pretty good discussion, by the way. Thanks anybody who's watching. I know Sumit watches it every week. At least that's the only feedback that I have so far. Maybe there are other people, folks who are watching. If you are watching, if you're somebody who is watching, let me or Kostav know that you're watching. What do you think of the stream? And we'll try to make that part of the process of our growth of this as well. So with that said, thanks for sticking around and see you next week. Cheers. Parting words from you? No?